They called me the first rebel. But no one ever asked what I was thinking. I want the throne of God.
Imagine a person who has everything. They have intelligence, influence, beauty, respect, and a position that many people would dream of having. Nothing seems missing. But then, slowly, something changes. They begin looking at what others have, instead of appreciating what they already possess. They start asking questions like, why should I follow someone else? Why shouldn't I be the one in control? What if I deserve more? And eventually, that desire grows into something much bigger than ambition. It becomes rebellion. Thousands of years ago, one of the most famous stories in human history described a being who had everything, yet chose to challenge the highest authority imaginable. His name was Lucifer. But what makes this story so fascinating is not just the rebellion itself. It is the psychology behind it. What happens inside a mind when admiration turns into pride? When confidence becomes arrogance? When wanting greatness becomes wanting power at any cost? Was Lucifer simply evil from the beginning, or was there a deeper psychological process behind the first rebellion? What can the story of Lucifer teach us about the human mind, temptation, ego, and the dangers of unchecked pride? Before we uncover the psychology behind one of the Bible's darkest figures, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the end, because the final part reveals the hidden lesson behind Lucifer's fall that applies to human behavior today. The story of Lucifer is one of the most debated and mysterious stories in religious history. In many Christian traditions, Lucifer is understood as an angel who rebelled against God and became associated with Satan. But beyond the spiritual interpretation, there is another fascinating question. What kind of mindset leads a powerful being to reject the very source of that power? Psychology studies patterns of thought, emotion, motivation, and behavior. So when we examine Lucifer's story from a psychological perspective, we are not simply asking, why did he become evil? We are exploring deeper questions. How does pride develop? How does someone justify rebellion? How can intelligence and talent become dangerous when combined with ego? Many people misunderstand Lucifer's story because they see it as only a battle between good and evil. But underneath the story is something very human. It is a story about identity, a story about comparison, a story about the desire to be recognized, and ultimately, a story about what happens when someone becomes convinced they deserve a position they were never meant to have. To understand the psychology behind Lucifer, we first have to go back to the beginning. According to biblical tradition, Lucifer was originally created as a powerful and beautiful angelic being. The name Lucifer is often connected to the idea of light-bearer or morning star. In passages traditionally associated with his fall, especially interpretations of Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, Lucifer is described as a figure connected with beauty, wisdom, and greatness before his downfall. The psychological question becomes, how does someone who has everything develop the desire for more? One explanation can be found in the psychology of human behavior. Research into personality and motivation shows that feelings of superiority sometimes grow when individuals become overly focused on their own importance. A person may begin with healthy confidence. They recognize their abilities. They understand their value. But when that confidence becomes disconnected from humility, it can transform. The person no longer thinks, I have been given something valuable. They begin thinking, I am valuable because of what I have. This difference is subtle, but powerful. The first mindset creates gratitude. The second creates entitlement. The story of Lucifer represents this transformation. The problem was not intelligence. It was not beauty. It was not strength. The problem was the relationship between those qualities and the ego. A person who believes their gifts make them superior can eventually become controlled by those same gifts. Environmental influences can also shape behavior. Even in modern psychology, researchers recognize that power changes how people see themselves and others. When someone receives constant admiration, authority, or praise, they may become disconnected from limitations. They may begin believing normal rules do not apply to them. This concept helps explain why the Lucifer story remains relevant. It is not only about an angel. It is about a psychological pattern that humans still experience today. And that pattern begins with one dangerous question. What if I deserve more than what I have? Key characteristics. Characteristic 1. Pride. Pride is one of the central themes connected with Lucifer's fall. But pride is often misunderstood. Healthy pride means appreciating your abilities and accomplishments. Unhealthy pride means believing your abilities place you above others. The psychological danger happens when self-worth becomes dependent on superiority. Someone controlled by pride does not simply want to succeed. They want recognition. They want validation. They want to feel above others. In everyday life, this can appear in small ways. A person who refuses advice because they believe they are always right. A leader who cannot accept criticism. Someone who sees admitting mistakes as weakness. The problem with pride is that it blocks self-reflection, and without self-reflection, growth becomes impossible. Characteristic 2. The need for control. One of the strongest psychological themes in Lucifer's rebellion is the desire for independence and control. The desire for control is deeply human. People want to influence their lives. They want freedom. They want choices. But when the need for control becomes extreme, it can create conflict. A person may stop asking, "What is right?" and start asking, "How can I get what I want?" This shift changes everything. In relationships, it can create manipulation. In leadership, it can create domination. In personal life, it can create constant dissatisfaction. The person is no longer searching for purpose. They are searching for power. Characteristic 3. Comparison. Comparison is another powerful psychological force. Many people become unhappy not because they lack something, but because they compare themselves to others. They look at someone else's position, success, appearance, or influence and think, "Why them and not me?" Comparison can motivate improvement, but it can also create resentment. The Lucifer story represents the danger of allowing comparison to control identity. Instead of focusing on his own purpose, the story suggests Lucifer became focused on another position. The desire was no longer simply to be great, it was to replace. Characteristic 4. Self-deception. One of the most interesting parts of rebellion psychology is that people rarely see themselves as the villain. Most people create explanations that make their choices feel justified. They tell themselves, "I am not wrong. I deserve this. I am the victim." Psychologists call this self-justification. The mind protects itself by creating a story where our actions make sense. In the Lucifer story, the rebellion is often interpreted as a moment where pride created a false belief about reality. The mind became convinced of its own version of truth, and that is one of the most dangerous psychological states a person can enter. The psychology behind Lucifer's story appears in everyday human behavior, not because people become supernatural villains, but because the same emotional patterns exist. In relationships, pride can prevent people from apologizing. A person may know they hurt someone, but refuse to admit it because their ego feels threatened. In families, the desire for control can create tension. Someone may believe, "If things are not done my way, everything will fail." At work, unchecked ambition can become destructive. A person may chase success so aggressively that they lose empathy for others. In society, collective pride can create conflict. Groups, organizations, and even nations can become convinced that their way is the only correct way. The lesson is not that ambition is bad. Ambition can create incredible achievements. The lesson is that ambition without humility can become dangerous, because the same qualities that help someone rise can also become the reason they fall. One surprising fact about Lucifer's story is that the Bible does not provide one single, detailed biography of Lucifer's rebellion. Much of the traditional understanding comes from combining different passages and later interpretations. This means the image of Lucifer developed over centuries through religious discussion, literature, and culture. Another surprising fact is that many ancient stories share similar themes. Across different cultures, there are stories about powerful beings who challenge higher authority. These stories often explore the same psychological ideas: pride, ambition, disobedience, the desire to become more than what one is. A third surprising fact is that Lucifer is often portrayed in modern culture as a symbol of intelligence and rebellion. Movies, books, and television sometimes present him not simply as evil, but as a complex character representing freedom, identity, and resistance. And that question leads us to the darker consequences of this mindset. The greatest danger connected with Lucifer's psychology is not simply rebellion, it is the inability to recognize when pride has taken control. When someone becomes convinced they cannot be wrong, they stop learning, they stop listening, they stop growing. Over time, this can damage relationships, careers, and personal development. The person may push away people who care about them because they interpret advice as an attack. They may create conflict because compromise feels like losing. They may chase achievement endlessly because nothing feels enough. The tragedy of Lucifer's story, from a psychological perspective, is the idea that greatness itself was not the problem. The problem was losing perspective. And that raises an important question. How can someone have confidence without becoming controlled by ego? That is where the real lesson of this story begins. Solutions, treatment, or management. If there is one powerful lesson hidden inside the psychology of Lucifer's story, it is this. The greatest battles often do not begin outside of us. They begin inside the mind. The struggle between confidence and arrogance, ambition and greed, leadership and control, is something every person faces in some form. So how can someone protect themselves from the same psychological patterns connected with Lucifer's fall? The first step is self-awareness. A person who understands their own thoughts and emotions is less likely to be controlled by them. Psychologists often emphasize the importance of reflection. Ask yourself, why do I want this? Am I pursuing this because it has meaning, or because I need to prove something? Am I listening to others, or only looking for people who agree with me? These questions create something pride often destroys: honest self-evaluation. The second step is practicing humility. Humility does not mean thinking less of yourself, it means seeing yourself accurately. A humble person can recognize their strengths while still accepting that they have weaknesses. They can receive correction without feeling attacked. They can celebrate success without believing success makes them superior. In modern psychology, this type of thinking is connected with emotional maturity. Emotionally mature people understand that their identity is bigger than their achievements. They are not only valuable when they are winning. The third step is learning healthy ambition. Ambition itself is not dangerous. Many of the greatest discoveries, inventions, and accomplishments in human history came from people with strong ambition. The danger appears when success becomes the only source of meaning. When achievement becomes an obsession, people may sacrifice relationships, values, and peace of mind. A healthier approach is to ask, how can my abilities serve something greater than myself? This question changes ambition from a search for superiority into a search for purpose. Another important strategy is developing empathy. Pride focuses attention inward. Empathy turns attention outward. When someone understands the feelings, experiences, and perspectives of others, it becomes harder to believe. My way is the only way. Empathy creates balance. It reminds us that everyone has value. Finally, one of the strongest protections against destructive thinking is the ability to accept limitations. Many people struggle because they believe limitations are weaknesses. But limitations are part of being human. Recognizing them does not reduce your value. It increases wisdom. The story of Lucifer is often interpreted as a warning about what happens when a being becomes consumed by the belief that nothing should stand above them. The modern psychological lesson is simple. The mind needs both confidence and humility. Strength without wisdom can become destructive. And that brings us to another important question. Many people confuse Lucifer's mindset with something else entirely. They confuse rebellion with independence. But they are not always the same. Now that we have explored the psychology behind Lucifer's rebellion, it is important to understand something many people misunderstand. Not every person who challenges authority is acting out of pride. Not every person who wants freedom is trying to gain control. There is a major difference between healthy independence and destructive rebellion. One seeks growth, the other seeks dominance. One asks, "How can I become better?" The other asks, "How can I become greater than everyone else?" But that is only part of the story. To truly understand Lucifer's psychology, we need to compare two powerful forces that often look similar from the outside: humility versus pride, because the difference between them can completely change the direction of a person's life. Humility often develops through self-awareness. A humble person understands that their abilities, opportunities, and achievements are influenced by many factors. They recognize contribution from others. They understand they are part of something bigger. Pride develops when someone begins placing too much importance on themselves. Instead of seeing success as something connected to effort, opportunity, and support, they begin seeing success as proof of superiority. The difference begins with perception, behavior. A humble person listens. They ask questions. They are willing to learn. They can admit, "I was wrong." A prideful person often protects their image. They may reject criticism. They may avoid admitting mistakes because they see mistakes as threats to their identity. The humble person grows because they are open. The prideful person struggles because they are closed. Characteristics. Humility is connected with patience, empathy, gratitude, and emotional balance. Pride is often connected with defensiveness, comparison, and the need for recognition. Humility does not remove confidence. It creates stable confidence. Pride often creates fragile confidence, because when someone's identity depends on being superior, any challenge feels like a personal attack. Relationships. Humility strengthens relationships. A humble person can apologize. They can compromise. They can celebrate another person's success. Pride damages relationships because it creates competition where connection should exist. A prideful person may struggle to say, "I need help. I made a mistake. You were right." Small moments like these reveal the difference between the two. Decision-making humility considers consequences. It asks, "What is the right choice?" Pride often asks, "What makes me look powerful?" This difference affects everything from personal choices to leadership decisions. Emotional responses. Humility responds to criticism with curiosity. Pride responds to criticism with defense. Humility says, "What can I learn from this?" Pride says, "How dare someone question me?" This is why the story of Lucifer remains psychologically fascinating. The conflict is not simply between good and evil. It is between two ways of seeing yourself. Throughout history, many stories have explored the dangers of pride and the desire for ultimate power. One famous example is the fall of the Roman Empire. Historians often discuss how internal problems, political instability, and overconfidence contributed to Rome's decline. While Rome's fall was complex, the story demonstrates a common pattern. Power can create confidence, but unchecked confidence can create blindness. Another example comes from literature. In Paradise Lost, Lucifer is portrayed as a deeply complex figure. The character is not presented simply as a monster. He is intelligent, charismatic, and powerful. But his tragedy comes from allowing pride to transform his identity. The story became one of the most influential portrayals of Lucifer in Western culture. Modern movies and television have also explored similar themes. Characters like Darth Vader demonstrate how fear, desire for control, and emotional conflict can lead someone down a destructive path. The reason audiences connect with these characters is because they reflect real psychological struggles. The question is not only, how does someone become evil and slowly convince themselves that their choices are justified? And that question brings us back to the lesson behind Lucifer. The story of Lucifer has fascinated humanity for centuries because it explores one of the deepest questions about the mind. How can greatness turn into destruction? From a psychological perspective, the story represents themes like pride, comparison, control, self-deception, and the danger of losing humility. The lesson is not that ambition is wrong. The lesson is that ambition without balance can become dangerous. Confidence can help us rise, but humility helps us stay grounded. The mind is powerful, but without self-awareness, that same power can become our greatest weakness. Now I want to hear from you. What surprised you the most about the psychology behind Lucifer's story? Do you think Lucifer's rebellion was mainly about pride, power, freedom, or something deeper? And do you think modern society struggles with the same psychological patterns today? Share your thoughts in the comments. The most interesting discussions often come from different perspectives, and I would love to hear your interpretation. If you enjoyed exploring the hidden psychology behind one of history's most fascinating figures, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more videos exploring psychology, history, human behavior, and the mysteries behind famous stories. If this topic interested you, watch our next video where we explore another powerful question. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, keep learning, and remember, understanding the mind is one of the greatest ways to understand humanity.